It begins slowly, as it always does. Tremble in the air, a scent that rises from the soil before the sky has even wept. You feel it on your skin before you hear it, a sudden coolness. Another follows, and another, and then the rain comes all at once, with that strange, stumbling rhythm of something half alive. Not fear in the loud screaming sense, but a steady unease. The kind that makes people close shutters and murmur prayers. Children pulled closer to the hearth. Livestock stood twitching beneath the lean-tos. Rain could mean rot. Rain could mean sickness, could mean the thatch wouldn't hold, and your bed straw would sour. The smoke from the hearth bends strangely as the wind changes. And you tighten your shawl, listening to the soft, insistent tapping on the roof above. It is what it brings. The hammering of the drops, the creak of soaked leather, the shuffle of boots on mud-slicked thresholds, you feel it all, even from within your walls. Rain blurs the lines between inside and out. It seeps through everything. You do not hum or smile or hold out your hand for the joy of it. You sit with your arms around your knees and your eyes on the ceiling, aware, listening, watching the way the world changes shape under the soft assault of water from above. You tuck the hem of your blanket under your feet and draw your thoughts inward like a cloak. Outside, the rain will fall through the night. There is a sadness in it, yes, but also a warning, a whisper from something larger than you. Watching the dark spots where the roof has begun to leak again, you whisper the names of saints, message. A shadow passed through heaven's eye. You count the number of chickens still safe under the coop. You remember last year when the rains didn't stop and the village healer buried 3 children in a single week? No matter how tightly you've stuffed the cracks with moss, it finds its way in. The smell of damp wood becomes part of your breath, the long cold days after. The sudden fever. The way mushrooms sprout in the corners of the granary, the aching dampness in your bones. The quiet panic of hunger when the harvest fails, not from drought, but from too much of the wrong water, falling at the wrong time. You wonder if the patch will hold. You wonder if your neighbor's ox, the one already limping, will slip in the mud and break its leg. You wonder if the barley will sprout too soon and spoil. Could mean the road to the next town turned to mire, that wagons would be stuck, that bread wouldn't come. It seeps into the wool of your tunic, into the folds of your sleeves, into the cracks of every timber wall. Rain in the Middle Ages did not fall polite. Light invaded. It crept and soaked and clung. It made itself known. It could be God's wrath or the devil's mischief. It could be a sign that someone had sinned, and now the land must grieve for it. In the hooves of beasts, in the dips of grave markers, gone soft at the edges, it trickles into forgotten places. And the land, old and slow, drinks it in with a kind of groaning wariness, as if it remembers too much. The rain fell like sorrow, that not yours perhaps, but sorrow all the same. And when it started, even the birds grew silent, their wings tucked tight beneath the eaves. A breath of wind that brushes the thatch roofs and lifts the edges of cloaks. It smells of wet bark, iron, and the deep hush of something old and unrelenting. The sky darkens, not quickly, but with the heavy grace of a curtain being drawn across a stage, turning day into something quieter and unsure. In the Middle Ages, you would have learned to watch the clouds the way others watched fire. A low belly of gray hanging over the fields was not simply a warning of wet fete, was a threat, a promise, a hush whispered by nature herself, though we would not have called it a blessing. Not then. The first drop falls and splashes into the soft brown dust outside your cottage, and so a quiet dread would settle across the village. And sometimes rain meant something worse. You might think of the rain as simply water from the heavens, but in those days, it was believed to carry punishment. It was not neutral. Inside, the candlelight flickers, and the rushes on the floor go damp at the edges. It is not the rain itself that frightens you. There is a rhythm to old villages during rain, and so you wait. You wait for the storm to pass, for the clouds to empty themselves and float on, but you do not do so lightly.
Out in the fields,
The rain falls steadily, flattening the wildflowers and bending the grain. It puddles in the wheel ruts. Even now, in the heart of the storm's beginning, you are not yet afraid and full. You are simply alert. And in the Middle Ages, when superstition was as common as bread, Rain was not just rain, it was an omen. And so, you close the shutters gently and place a bowl beneath the drip in the ceiling.
Yes.
And you will try, as best you can, not to dream of floods. When the rain ends, it does not leave silence. It leaves a wetness that breathes. After the rain has fallen, after the gutters have spilled over, after the ox has stumbled in the mire, that is when the whispers begin low. Urgent things, you only need memories. The last time it rained like this, the old shepherd lost his wife. The time before that, it was the midwife, gone in 3 days. Your aunt still limps from the cough that nearly drowned her in her own breath. And so you pull your cloak tighter and avoid the puddles. You look out at the path and see where footprints have filled with water. But even she speaks softer than usual, and you saw her collecting herbs beneath the old ash tree of lost things, and try not to listen too closely when someone knocks on your neighbor's door in the night. You try not to wonder what the rain left behind in the puddles. Try not to breathe too deeply. Before dawn, something she only does when she fears what's coming. No one walks the road now, not if they can help it. Too many coughs, too many closed shutters. A stillness in the village that feels like the breath before a scream. A hush that settled into the bones of the house. It's a sickness that arrived not with fire, but with water, as if the reflection might hold something dangerous. You hang sprigs of rue and rosemary above your door. You mutter charms while stirring the pot. You look with suspicion at anyone who sneezes. Passed from hearth to hearth, like coals wrapped in cloth. Someone's baby has a cough that will not stop, and the scent of mildew clings to the beams. You try to dry your boots by the hearth, but they remain stubbornly wet. The chickens refuse to leave their roost. The dog, usually restless, lies curled tight as a snail, his eyes flicking nervously toward the door each time the wind moans. The cow's milk has turned, thick and strange-smelling.
Ow.
You watch for signs in everything: soured cream, twitching rats, a sudden shiver down your spine. The world feels thinner somehow, like it's been wrung out and left to hang in the cold. And you know that in this weather, they may never be truly dry again. You drink onion broth and pray it keeps your chest clear. You press your hand to your own forehead and wonder if it feels warmer than it ought to. Someone's mother is taken to bed, her breath wheezing and wet. The way it soaked through the straw roof despite all the patching, the way it turned the bread dough heavy and the blanket slick. You can wash away blood, scrape away filth, burn away fleas, but water finds everything. When it brings sickness, there is nothing to hold against it but time, luck, and prayer. The baker's boy vomited in the alley behind the church, and now he doesn't rise. Rain, they say, it's the rain. It always brings it. It leaves the ground slick with its memory. You've lived it. Or at least heard it often enough that your body tenses before your mind even remembers why. Rain means dampness, and dampness means sickness. Not the kind with simple remedies, not the fevers that break with sweat and time. No, this is the deeper sickness, the kind that seeps into lungs and lingers behind the eyes. It comes on soft feet, and by the time you notice it, it's already halfway through the door. The air thick and still, as if waiting for something to crawl up from the soil. Puddles gather in the ruts of the village lane, reflecting a sullen sky. Others speak of miasma's foul airs, stirred up by the rain, invisible but deadly. A few blame the frogs, which emerge after storms, or the strange mushrooms that sprout overnight beside the well. Still others say it's punishment that someone among you has sinned. Now the rain is washing the world clean of your collective guilt. And water lingers in the folds of cloaks, in the cracks between stones, in the corners of the barn where the straw now turns dark and smells faintly of mold. And though the sun may return, pale and uncertain, you know it cannot dry everything in time. The real fear comes after. You know the story already. You see it in the way people change. The butcher no longer whistles. The priest forgets to finish the benediction. The woman who sells candles at the corner of the market now walks with a stoop, her shawl pulled tight, not against cold, but against what might be in the air. For in the Middle Ages, illness was not understood, not truly, and what cannot be understood becomes feared. What cannot be named becomes monstrous. Some say it's the devil's breath rising from the wet ground, but you do not need reasons. Inside the cottage, the fire smokes, and the warmth is stubborn. The floor is slick with damp rushes. Even the animals grow uneasy. and always it goes back to the rain. The way it clung to your shoulders. You light another candle, though it's midday. The sky remains heavy, as if still sulking. The healer says it's nothing yet, that it's too soon to worry, that the coughs might pass, that the fevers will break. So you wrap yourself in another blanket. You steep mugwort in mint. You murmur names of saints, of loved ones, because in the Middle Ages, fear did not need thunder or lightning. It only needed rain. A quiet, steady falling from above. And though the storm has passed, you know better than to trust the quiet. There is a softness that comes after the rain, not the gentleness of peace, but the slow decay of things turning to ruin. The ground too full no longer swallows the water, but lets it sit like a weight upon its surface. Shimmering in ditches and corners, creeping through seams, pooling beneath steps and under beds. It soaks into the thatch, into the straw, into the very bones of the village, and once it settles, it begins its quiet work. You do not see the rot at first. It is not a bold thing. It begins in corners, in the edge of a basket, in a damp patch beneath the sack of oats. It whispers rather than shouts. You air the rushes as best you can. You know that beneath the stable doors the hay has blackened, that under the cloaks hung neatly by the fire mold blooms in secret, that the granary smells different now. The rain that stayed too long. The rain that soaked not just your fields but your hearth, your stores, your sense of safety. In a world where survival was measured not in months but in weeks, not in years but in seasons, such wetness was not a passing nuisance. It was a threat to life itself. The cart path glistens, not from rain, but from what the rain left behind. The barrels meant for ale now smell sharp and wrong. Someone walks past your window and coughs along, wet sound that curls around your heart like smoke. For what good are fields if the grain molds on the stalk? What good is a cow if her hay is rotting? You press your ear to the wall and listen, not for voices but for drips, for signs, for the small, creeping sounds of a house slowly giving way. What good is a home if the roof drips and the firewood won't catch? Sweeter, perhaps, but in that way that sweet things sometimes rot. You hear the grocer mutter as he throws out another sack of spoiled barley. You see the baker scratch his head at the flour gone clumpy and sour. You watch the woman who makes cheese frown as her rennet fails to set. You carry the blankets out when the sun shows its face, even if only for an hour. But the damp lingers. It has become part of the house, part of the air. It curls into your joints and settles there, like an old tenant. No one does. But there is a heaviness to every movement now. Even that, precious and hoarded, has gone damp, clumped, lessened. You bite your tongue and say nothing, but your hands shake slightly as you set it down. You look toward the ceiling again and find another spot, darker than it was yesterday. You close your eyes, as if the village itself is wading through unseen water. You hear it in the way the blacksmith sighs. You see it in the way the children no longer play outside. You feel it in the ache in your back when you rise in the morning, and in the way the dog refuses to leave the hearth, even when called. A change in smell, softening. A darkness blooming where there was once pale yellow. By the time you notice it, the damage is already done. The straw in the loft grows musty. The hay in the barn sours. The linen that was folded dry now clings to itself with a sour dampness, as though the rain has left behind a part of itself in every fiber. You lift the lid of a chest, and there it is, the smell of wood beginning to weep, of cloth losing its shape. Not the clean rot of compost or forest floor, but the heavy, intimate rot of things too close to dear. It clings to the soles of your shoes, to the hem of your dress. The roof weeps steadily in two places now, and the buckets you placed beneath are no longer enough. That each drop holds a secret, and when too many fall at once, the world cannot hold the weight. The land forgets how to be dry. The wood forgets how to stay firm. And people forget how to hope. A thin layer of mold gathers on the windowsill, pale and lacy, like a frost that has forgotten it is summer. Your fingers trace it without thinking. It comes off in soft tufts that leave your fingertips damp and smelling of earth and ruin. To the inside of your nose, even after you leave the room, it spreads. The apples, so carefully wrapped for winter, begin to soften. The potatoes sprout strange white fingers. The onions turn to slime. You remember, faintly, that your grandfather once said rain carries memory in it? You move slowly through the house now, careful not to disturb what has begun. You step around the puddle by the hearth. Outside, the village looks unchanged, but you know better. And always it leads back to the rain that came too fast. You do not complain aloud. Rot is a quiet thing, but it is relentless. You kneel beside the cupboard and lift the lid of the salt jar. Outside, the chickens scuffle in the mud. You wrap your arms around yourself. You light another taper. Rain is not loud. Not anymore. It is past. But what it has sawn beneath the straw, behind the walls, inside the bread and bones of things, that is the part that stays. It begins with the slow vanishing of paths, familiar ones you've walked 100 times. The little road that runs beside the mill, the lane between your cottage and the well, the track through the barley field where children once ran barefoot under the sky. The rain does not wash them away all at once. One wheel sunk deep and tilted, a sad lean to its frame. You hear the blacksmith curse under his breath as he eyes the iron that should have been delivered days ago. The weaver waits for wool that does not come.
Now because
Of bandits or wolves, but because the world itself turns soft beneath your feet. Less ale, less laughter. The traders no longer stop here on their way to the next village, for the road is impassable. And even the promise of coin cannot tempt them through the mire. The shelves grow emptier, the barrels lighter, the gossip thinner. There are no new stories, only the old ones. The road is no longer visible at all, just a faint wet depression through the meadow. And somewhere beyond that, the rest of the world waits, silent and unreachable. Told in lower voices now, the wheels will turn again. But for now, you live in the space between things, between visits, between markets, between moments of dry, safe movement, as if the rain might be listening. Wagons tip. You mark the passing days by the wax left in each candle. You listen for the sound of hooves or cartwheels or footsteps in the dark. Where's the woman with ribbons in her basket? The one who always smelled of lavender? You answer gently, brushing their hair back from their foreheads. You speak of delays, of weather, of patience. But inside, you feel the distance growing between here and there, like threads unraveling, like doorways closing. Horses stumble, shoes are lost. Men vanish in the marshes that weren't marshes before. Even short journeys can become tragedies. And so you stay. You wait. Watch the horizon and wonder what might be waiting beyond it, but it doesn't matter. You cannot reach it anyway. The priest keeps his sermon short, his voice low, as if afraid to stir hope when the roads remain so silent. No, it wears them down gently, steadily, like a breath that never ends. There is no way to reach her in time. And so, you both light a candle and pray from afar, hoping it's enough. The one held under the big elms near the bridge. You think of apples stacked in baskets, of linen stretched across makeshift tables, of songs sung by old women selling herbs. You try to remember the sound of many feet on dry earth. But even your memories feel wet now, damp around the edges. Ow. Was it really so loud, so bright? Or was that just the hope of a different season? Rain, you think, should nourish, should bring life, but here it leaves only isolation. It turns villages into islands. One day they are hard-packed earth, solid beneath your steps. The next, they are soft, then sticky, then gone. In the Middle Ages, a road was not simply a way to get somewhere, it was a lifeline, a thread through the great tangle of wild and wilderness. The roads connected you to grain, to candles, to salt and fish, to family and news and distant rumors of kings. And when the rain came heavy and long, it did not just muddy the path, it severed the thread, left you stranded in your own little world, where nothing arrived and nothing could leave. You step outside one morning, and the first thing you notice is how quiet it is. No creak of wheels, no clop of hooves, no voices calling to one another from the hedgerows. The only sound is the soft squelch beneath your boots and the far-off drip of water from a broken gutter. The road has become something else, a ribbon of muck, glistening and treacherous. It grips your foot and tries to keep it. You pull away and leave behind the print of your soul like a wound. The old cart, the one that carried firewood from the hills, sits abandoned near the orchard. You look down the path that leads out of town, and it is no longer a path at all, just a smear of brown beneath the hedges. A place where water sits in still, glinting pools, mirroring the heavy sky. You remember what your father said once, that a road disappears, not when it floods, but when no one dares to walk it. And now no one does. Travel becomes dangerous in this wet season. In the tavern, the mood is quieter. Children ask questions. Why has no one come from the next town? When will the tinker return with new pins and combs? The midwife tells you of a woman in labor 2 hills over, but the roads are gone. Hill paths are rivers now. You think of the market. You wrap your cloak tighter and watch the mist rise from the ground in the evening. In time, the roads will return. They always do. The ground will harden, the ruts will fill with straw and stones, and that space is full of waiting. So you light the lantern by your door, in case someone braver than you decides to come. You stack dry twigs beneath the stove. But the only sound is the rain, still dripping quiet and patient as if it knows it has all the time in the world. It's a truth as old as houses themselves, that no corner of the house the rain does not reach, not in time. Even as the storm moves on, even as the clouds begin to break and a thin sliver of daylight returns, the house continues to weep. The roof, though thatched and patched and prayed over, cannot hold forever. The rain has found its way in, as it always does, slow and relentless, like a secret long kept, and suddenly whispered. But here now, in this soft, dark season, it is hard to imagine such things. The world shrinks to the shape of your walls. To make your peace with silence, to listen for the patter of rain, and know that you are held. Contained, loved, despite the slow, relentless ache of wood on wood. And in this way, you weather the season, not by fighting the storm, but by folding into it, becoming like water yourself, yielding and strong. The roof becomes a ceiling not just of your home, but of your mind. And the sound of water tapping from above becomes the steady beat of your own quiet fear. Each evening, you inspect the house like a guard on night watch. You check the ceiling, the corners, the floorboards near the hearth. You shift furniture to spare it from the worst of the leaks. You tilt chairs, lay dry cloths, bundle everything precious in oilskin and prayer. But the damp still finds a way. It kisses the underside of your bed. It seeps into books and rushes and sacks of flour. It lingers in corners and crawls along the stone like ivy. There is no end to it, not yet. The first drops are easy to ignore. You tell yourself it's nothing. It's just the wind pushing sideways, just a little seepage along the seams. But soon, there is a rhythm to it. A slow, persistent tapping, soft as breath, steady as a clock that finds its way into your thoughts and sits there. You place a bowl beneath the worst of it and hope it holds. But the next day, you find another leak, and another, and then 2 bowls, 3, 5. You begin to memorize the sound of dripping water. The house smells of wet wood now, of old straw and wool that can never quite dry. You press your palm to the beams overhead and feel the cool softness that should not be there. The ceiling sagged slightly in one corner. The floor has darkened beneath the window. You mop where you can. You wring out cloth after cloth. But the rain leaves more than puddles. It leaves worry. It leaves a hush in your chest that grows heavier with each drop that falls indoors. The fire does not like the damp. It sulks in the hearth, refusing to catch, coughing up smoke that drifts low and lazy along the rafters. Even dry wood does not burn right anymore. The bark hisses. The logs smolder with a kind of sullen reluctance, as though the fire itself has grown tired of fighting the damp. You poke and prod. You whisper to it. You cradle it with straw and dry moss, but it flares only briefly before slipping back into orange slumber. Without a strong fire, the cold creeps in. Not a dramatic cold, but the kind that seeps into your fingertips, your knees, the back of your neck. A creeping chill that settles in your clothes and curls against your skin like a wet cat. Your breath fogs in the morning, even indoors. The steam from your cup vanishes quickly like it's afraid to linger. You pile on layers, you wrap your feet in rags, you hold your hands near the dull glow of coal's butt. Warmth is something earned, and now it comes dearly. And still, the rain drips. You think of people in drier places you'll never see where roofs are strong and fires burn tall and straight, where rain is rare and welcome. And so you learn to tend the dying embers. It always begins with a rumor. A traveler, caked in mud, comes through the village gate, whispering of rising waters a few miles east. A farmer returns from the stream and mutters that the banks are fuller than they've ever been. A child points out how the pond behind the chapel has crept past the reeds and swallowed the bench where old men sit to watch the sunset. The word flood is not spoken loudly. It hangs at the edge of things, soft as mist, heavy as a held breath. And still, the rain comes. You watch the path become a stream. It's not a wild, rushing torrentino. It is slower, more patient, like a thought unfolding. The road is gone now, fully drowned. They came not with roars, but with the silence of things taken too far. The earth, already heavy with rain, simply could not take more. It wept upward. It loosened. It shifted. You light another candle, watching the flame flicker as the water kisses the underside of the door again and again. Like a creature testing its cage, the wind presses against the shutters. They leave mold. They leave hunger, always listening. But the silvery gray of clouds, thinning just enough for time to move again, not fully, it does not bless. It simply falls. But it has paused, and in that pause, you begin again. You rise. You pour the water from your boots. You mop what can be mopped. You move the bowls and buckets, and sit quietly watching the fire catch hold once more. You hear the hollow sound of something floating against the wall. You hear the soft creak of beams adjusting to new weight. You hear the far-off barking of a dog, stranded perhaps. You hear the world holding its breath. They leave memories of things floating that should never have touched water books, shoes, dolls, chairs. You do not open them. And then, things that had been stable became soft. There will be no bread this week, no visits to the next village, no herbs gathered from the hillside. The hens may fall ill. The cow may founder. You will sleep with damp in your sheets and wake to the sound of dripping where there should be silence. Fields became swamps, roads became rivers, and homes became islands. And water moves past your gate with the steady grace of something meant to be elsewhere. It laps against the wood. It sinks into the garden. You stand on its edge and see the water brown and thick, filled with bits of twig and leaf and straw. It moves quickly now, licking the edges of the path, carving its way toward the village as if remembering some old route from long ago. You see where it has undercut the fence. You see where the roots of the oak tree have begun to show. The turnips are already lost. You do not speak of it. You lift what you can, sacks of grain, baskets of dried herbs, shoes left too close to the door. Pull the table closer to the center of the room and place the cat high upon it. She watches you with unreadable eyes. There is no panic in your movements, only resignation. You have lived through this before. You simply close the door and push the latch, as if that small gesture could hold back the world. Floods in the Middle Ages were not the violent walls of water you might imagine today. They were quiet engulfings. You go to check the brook, the one near the pasture where the geese used to bathe, and you know what comes next? You return home quickly. When the river rises, it does not knock politely. It seeps beneath the doorframe. It finds the cracks in the stone, the hollows between floorboards. You feel it first as a chill on your ankles, then a slickness that spreads. You lift your skirts and breathe slowly. The fire is still lit, but it burns low, its flame quivering as the damp creeps in. Outside, the rain is softer, now barely more than mist, but it is enough. The ground is too full. The world is spilling over. In the village, bells are not rung for floods. There's no need. The warning is already in the air, in the smell of wet bark and trampled grass, in the dull echo of water against stone. You see neighbors moving quietly, carrying buckets, stacking stones, gathering chickens in their arms like children. No one screams, no one runs. Fear, here, wears the face of endurance. You place your boots near the hearth to dry, though you know they won't. You wrap cloth around the bottoms of the door, and you think of what the flood takes, not just crops and footpaths, but rhythm, routine, the daily motions that hold your life together. Floods leave behind more than mud. Instead, you sit on the stool that hasn't yet grown damp and close your eyes. You recite psalms you learned as a child, half-remembered lines braided with lullabies. You press your fingers together and pray not for sunshine, but for rest, for stillness, for the water to stop rising. In the night, you wake often listening. When morning comes, it brings a kind of light, not brightness. The flood is not gone, because even here, even now, In this water-bound world, you know the truth. The rain does not care, does not hate. And you, small and human and cold, simply endure. There is a moment, just after the floodwater begins to recede, when the village holds its breath not in fear, but in waiting. Waiting to see what the rain has unearthed, what it has loosened, what it has stirred from the places best left undisturbed. The smell comes first, not sharp, not sudden, but creeping. A thick, heavy scent that clings to the corners of your mouth and nose like a damp cloth. The smell of churned earth, of rotting leaves, of wet linen and spoiled grain. Shallow graves, simple cloth, the weight of a few stones to mark a life. And the rain with its patient fingers can undo such things. It finds the cracks between time and flesh. It does not ask permission. It only seeps. Everywhere the rain has disturbed what once lay still. A stone wall collapses to reveal a nest of bones beneath. A tree topples, pulling up roots twisted around what looks like an old, forgotten marker. The stream brings down bits of pottery, a scrap of cloth, a skull maybe small, smooth, childlike. Listening to the wind rattle the shutter, the gentle creak of timber settling. You imagine the earth outside, soft and restless. You imagine the places where the dead no longer lie quite as still as they did before. Imagine the rain, not gone, but waiting just above, still heavy in the sky. You do not ask where it came from. But beneath that, beneath the ordinary decay of a village soaked through, there is something else. The mist hangs low, and the ground still squelches beneath your feet. But the clouds have lifted a little, and you tell yourself that means something. You sweep the hearth. You hang your shawl to dry. You whisper a quiet prayer to no one in particular, something older. When the village is too wet for work and too tired for song, people speak in whispers of what has shifted beneath their feet. The midwife says she dreamed of hands reaching up through the mud. The baker claims he saw footprints in the clay leading away from the chapel wall. The priest says nothing, but he burns more incense than usual and leaves the chapel doors open at night. It smells like stone and iron, half to scare the children and half to explain what cannot be named. Of bones rising from the soil, of spirits unmoored by storms, of water that washes away not just earth but the boundaries between the living and the dead. It turns soil in a place that should not have been touched. Not really. Another leans so far it may not stand another rain. But the ground is quiet now. The smell, though still clinging faintly to the morning air, is fading. But now, with the graveyard soft underfoot and the air thick with the scent of old things, you walk a little faster, on the slight rise above the marshy bend in the path. It was chosen for its elevation, but even so, the rain has found its way in. You walk past it with your head lowered. It will stir the earth. It will remember the names no one speaks anymore, trying not to look too long. But you notice the way the stones lean now, soft-footed in the soggy ground. The way the grass grows in clumps, torn open by the rush of water. The way the fence, once neat, is askew post broken, another sunken into the mud like a bone into flesh, like a memory that does not want to be remembered. The graveyard lies behind the chapel. Someone says a grave collapsed during the storm. Just one, just a shallow one, from long ago. But you hear the way they say it, with that particular hush, and suddenly the smell makes sense. In the Middle Ages, the dead were buried quickly. You remember stories Staley's told at night by the hearth? You never believed them. It's not just the graveyard, Rain remembers, but it also reveals. And in these quiet days after the storm, no one sleeps well. You lie in bed, and in your half-dreaming, half-waking state, you think of time as a shallow grave too, one that can be opened, one that rain can find. You rise early the next morning, and as you pass the chapel on your way to the well, you glance, just once, toward the graveyard. One stone has fallen. The graves, for now, are still, but you know the rain will come again. And when it does, it will not knock or ask or pause at the gate. It will fall. It will seep. And all you can do is wait and hope that the soil holds. It was not just the fields or the hearths or the graves that rain unsettled. It was the walls themselves. The boundaries that marked this world from the next, the human from the wild, the sacred from the profane. Rain did not care for such things. It ran over every surface, under every threshold, through every known and unknown place, blurring the lines with a soft and steady insistence. When it rained too long in the Middle Ages, people grew quiet, not only out of fear, but out of awe. They watched as the things they believed were separate church and forest, village and waste. A well-worn road could vanish in a single night beneath a silver sheet of water. But in wet seasons, when the rain poured for days and the fog crept up from the river's edge, the trees seemed to come nearer. It was not that they moved, antlers too large for any deer. She did not fear it, or if she did, she had made peace with it. She said the rain reminded her that all things return to the earth in time, that stone becomes mud and mud becomes root, and root becomes leaf, and leaf becomes ash, that nothing lasts. Not even fear. Eyes too bright, too clever, watching from the hedgerow. Hooves that made no sound. Shadows that lingered even after the sun came out. By holy places and forbidden woods, the rain paid no mind to such divisions, you realized. You could no longer tell where the village ended and the wilderness began. It fell upon the poor and the noble, the priest and the thief, the sheep and the wolf. It fell until nothing was clean or unclean, sacred or damned. Just wet, just gray, just quiet. The line between animal and spirit thinned when the rain fell, and you were no longer sure whether the creature in the field was a fox or something else entirely. Not really. But the villagers felt them, pressing in, bending low, roots testing the soft ground beneath the cottages, branches tapping at thatch like fingers. Some said she courted the forest spirits or worse, that she let the rain speak to her, that the rain could speak at all. The ringing of bells was muffled by the mist. It did not strike. It only came and came and came. Through roofs, under doors, down chimneys. It entered the church and did not flinch. It washed over altars and sacred relics with the same cold patience it gave to gutters and dung heaps. Ivy found new cracks in the stone. Ferns sprang up and hearths left cold too long. The rain gave the forest permission to grow wild again, and that wildness did not stop at the village gates. The bleating of sheep came warped through the wet wind, so that it no longer sounded like sheep at all, but something else, something older, more uncertain. Dogs did not bark at strangers, because they could not see them. Chickens stopped laying, goats refused to climb. Even the children no longer ran through the streets barefooted and howling. They sat on thresholds, huddled in shawls, staring out into a world that no longer obeyed its old rules. So still it looked like glass, until you stepped in and found the mud waiting underneath. Travelers lost their way between one village and the next. Carts overturned, bridges collapsed under quiet pressure. The rain did not roar, it simply was, and that was enough. Man and beast began to flow into one another, like ink dropped into water. The edges softened, the familiar became strange. The great stone walls of the manor darkened with dampness, their carvings slick and shining. That which was built to last began to seem fragile. The carvings of saints grew slick with rain, their once clear expressions worn away to something more ghost-like, more weathered, as if they too had wept. The steeples no longer pointed proudly skyward, but disappeared into a low cloud, swallowed by the very heavens they once reached for. Paths disappeared. Even the sounds changed, and the forest crept closer. In dry times, the woods had their place. Beyond the edge of the last fence, across the stream, behind the ridge. They said the green things loved the rain because it was their time to take back what had been stolen. Moss climbed higher on the walls. There were always stories of things seen in the fog. The wise woman in the village would sometimes go out in the rain, barefoot, her skirt soaked to the waist, her hands held open. But not everyone agreed. And late at night, lying in your damp straw bed, you wondered, what did the rain want? It did not shout. It did not care what you believed. And maybe that was the scariest thing of all, because in a world defined by faith, by boundary and prayer and penance, and as you stood one evening in your flooded doorway, watching the stream where the road once ran, the rain had blurred it all, and something deep in your bones whispered that it liked it better that way. There were days when the rain felt like a passing Muda summer sigh, a gentle whisper that draped itself over the eaves and let the moss breathe. But there were other days, darker days, when the sky seemed to forget how to close, when the clouds hung so low you could nearly touch them, and the color of the world was nothing but shades of iron. On those days, it felt as though the heavens had cracked open and the earth had been left to drown in memory. In the Middle Ages, the world moved according to patterned seasons, saints' days, harvest moons, the toll of the church bell, but the rain had no calendar. It did not honor feast or fast. It came when it pleased, and worse still, it sometimes refused to leave. A day of rain became two, two became four. Then a week, and another. The earth turned to soup. Paths became rivers. The streams swelled and surged with a fury that belied their humble beginnings. Chickens clung to perches, pigs grunted in flooded pens, and horses, proud creatures of burden, slipped in the mud and cried out like children. Inside the cottage, everything grew soft. Straw bedding turned sour. The rushes on the floor no longer masked the smell of rot. A thick dampness clung to clothes and blankets, to skin and breath. Bread molded faster than it could be eaten. Cheese sweated and soured. Even the firewood, tucked for months in a dry corner, began to hiss and steam when tossed into the hearth, unwilling to burn. The damp crept into bones. Old men held their joints and muttered that the wet was worse than the cold. Mothers pressed linen to their infants' chests, whispering prayers that the cough would pass. The smell of herbs filled the airtime and wormwood. Sage and rosemary tied in bundles above the door to keep away the fevers that rose when everything else fell still. And still it rained. The prayers grew louder, more desperate. The church, which once stood proud on the hill, now stood alone in a lake of its own making, its reflection shivering on the water like a ghost. The priest waded through knee-high puddles to ring the bell. He did not call to worship, but to beg, to plead with a sky that had no ears. Some said it was a punishment. Others said it was a test. A few whispered of curses, of old sins buried in the soil, now rising with the floodwaters to make themselves known. A girl had drowned in the next village. A boy was taken by a river that hadn't even existed 2 days earlier. Graves split open on the hillside. Their stones tumbled, their contents loosened into the flood. When the rain lasted long enough, the world changed its shape. The village was no longer a village, but an island. And every soul upon it began to look inward, wondering, not just what the rain might take, but what it might reveal. Inside your home, you huddled beside the hearth that barely smoked, watching water drip from the corner of the ceiling. You placed pots beneath the leaks, moved your few belongings to higher shelves. You stopped sweeping. What was the point? The mud came back each morning like clockwork. And then, as quietly as it had come, it stopped. No fanfare. No light breaking through the clouds. Just a pause. A hush. The sound of nothing, so loud it made your ears ring. You stepped outside, cautiously, half afraid it was a trick. The world glistened like a drowned jewel. Trees bent low with the weight of the water. Birds, stunned into silence, sat puffed and blinking on dripping branches. And you realized you had forgotten what stillness felt like. But the stillness was not peace. It was aftermath. The river had shifted its banks. A cottage had slid halfway down a hill. The market square was filled with silt and broken things. And everywhere there was the smell of things that had been too long wet, of death and mold and growth that had no business growing. The rain had left behind its mark, not with thunder, not with fire, but with persistence, with quiet, unrelenting presence, with a touch that softened all things until they broke. You understood now why they feared it, because rain didn't need to shout to undo the world, it only needed to linger. It does not end with silence, nor with sun. The fear of rain does not wash away the moment the clouds depart, nor is it erased by a single dry morning. In the Middle Ages, the end of rain was not relief, it was the beginning of waiting. Waiting for what would come next, for the rot to reveal itself, for the walls to fall in slow collapse, for hunger to stretch its limbs once more. The rain was gone, but it had changed the rhythm of the world. The soil, once generous and brown, now clung to itself in heavy clumps. Seeds drowned in their sleep. Roots struggled for air. A garden that should have bloomed in color now grew only silence. You walked between the rows, remembering what had been planted, wondering what might still rise if anything dared. The fields outside the village were a tapestry of ruin. The thatched roofs had been combed by the wind, their golden layers pulled apart and left in tangles. Fences leaned like tired men. Chickens wandered further than they should, pecking at worms drawn to the surface by too much wet. Even the church, always the highest point, wore a ring of watermarks like a collar around its base. And the people. The people moved as if through dreams. You passed them in the lanes, faces drawn, boots heavy with muck. They no longer spoke of the rain with sharp dread, but with the quiet reverence one gives to things that cannot be stopped. They did not curse it now. They folded it into their stories, into the rhythm of their superstitions. The rain, they said, had memory, remembered where it had fallen, and it would return. You watched your neighbors hang herbs from lintels, scatter ashes at thresholds, draw symbols on their doors in clay and chalk. Not magic, not exactly, just gestures, just hope shaped into motion. I guess when the sky had turned against them, there had been nothing to do but wait. And now, in its silence, they waited still. In the evenings, the fire crackled again. It's not brightly, but enough. You set your damp shoes by the hearth, your cloak hanging like a shadow on the wall. The walls still wept a little. The beams creaked softly, like old voices remembering. You found yourself listening, night after night, for that first soft sound on the roof, that first drop, that first sigh. Because it would come again. Of course it would. The sky was not a thing you could trust. You had learned, as your parents had before you, that the rain was not just water. It was story and sickness and loss. It could fill a river and steal a child in the same breath. It could feed a field or ruin it. And no man, no saint, no prayer could know which it would be until it was far too late. So you kept the food higher on the shelf? You leaned the broom against the door. You patched the thatch one more time, even if your fingers ached. You remembered the smell of wet rushes, the sight of floating bread, the way your heart had dropped when the corner of the roof began to drip. You remembered. And in remembering, you prepared. The sun might shine again, the grain might rise, the cattle might fatten, but the rain too would return. And when it did, you would listen. You would know its footfall, soft and terrible, like the tread of something ancient crossing your roof in the night, and you would not ask it to leave, only to pass, only to pass.